So again, let me remind you, it is July 11th, right? So what happened today halfway around the world? So let's look at what happened today halfway around the world, so we get context of what's taking place. So halfway around the world in Russia, let me go to this. So this occurred today, an emergency announcement, but also on July 11th, 2022, TASS put out a notice that the European Union is not using all tools to make Lithuania allow transit to Kaliningrad. So this came out by the Russian official government bureau saying that the European Union is not using all its tools to make Lithuania allow transit to Kaliningrad. If you read the news on this, the European Union has postured, oh yeah, this is not good what Lithuania is doing. We should try to diffuse it. And Russia saying that you're blocking goods into Kaliningrad from Russia. And you'll see why this is important, and you're not doing enough. All right, so what's going on here? So let's unpack this, what's been going on, because what's really unfortunate is that all of this has been going on. Our movement, Truth, Freedom, Health movement, is trying to educate people. None of the major TV stations, none of the major media, New York Times, has even brought this to the public. They're talking about Roe versus Wade over here. We're talking about Biden's issues. We're talking about January 6th, but there's no deep discussion in the media about the realities of a potential nuclear war. And the fact that the New York City Emergency Management Group is putting out a nuclear preparedness video, it really makes you wonder what's going on. And hopefully people wake up. Hopefully people get their head out of what and stop getting out of this left narrative, thinking Trump's their savior or thinking Biden's their savior, or the theater that we're seeing on January 6th has anything to do with reality. The theater that we're seeing with pro-life and pro-choice has anything to do with the broader realities, the economic realities of what's going on to everyday Americans. But what you're seeing right here is on July 11th, Russia is getting really pissed off that one of their provinces, first they had the issue with Eastern Ukraine, the essentially 1/4, as we know, of the Ukrainian military are Azov members, fascists who were put into power by the US government through Obama. And we'll talk about that. So we've been poking the bear, literally and figuratively. So this news just came out on July 11th, as you can see the date, that Russia is upset that Lithuania is escalating the blockade of one of their other provinces on the far eastern part, which is on the Baltic, etc. So let's go into this. So what's going on? So Newsweek put out a note saying Putin and Lukashenko, who is the head of Belarus, who is very close allies with Putin, are planning a joint response to the Lithuania blockade. And this was, again, July 11th at 11:35 a.m. That's this morning. So let's go into what's been going on. So you can see here, it says Russian President Vladimir Putin and his counterpart, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, are coordinating a possible joint response against Lithuania, according to a report from TASS, which I just shared. The Kremlin said in a statement that the two leaders held talks on how the two countries could respond to Lithuania after it imposed European sanctions on materials heading to Russia's Kaliningrad territory on the Baltic Sea coast. And as the Kremlin said, emphasis was placed on the situation relating to illegal restrictions imposed by Lithuania in the transit of goods to Kaliningrad region. So where is Kaliningrad? Some of you may know this, but here's a quick geography lesson. We'll get into more details. Here's Russia over here. Here's Lithuania. Down below over here, this is actually Belarus. So Belarus over here is an ally of Russia's. And there's a little path right here, if you can see it right here, between Belarus that goes to Kaliningrad. So Kaliningrad is part of Russia, but it's on the Baltic. The Baltic is the sea that is another way that Russia can bring in goods. And Kaliningrad has become very strategic since 1945 for Russia. But you notice it's sandwiched between Lithuania and Poland, but there is a passage right through here. So in this recent news that came out, it said Lithuania borders Kaliningrad and also shares a 422-mile border with Belarus, home to an estimated 1 million people, and it has been Russia's territory since the end of World War II in 1945. So this is what they're talking about. This is this little piece of border, and we'll talk about this. This is called the Suwalki Gap that's shared. As the article says, Lithuania angered Moscow after it expanded restrictions on trade through Kaliningrad despite prior warnings. Now, the EU sanctions, to remind everyone, just the timeline here, you may know on February 24th is when Russia went in to Ukraine, and it was on the June 17th is when the European Union, e.g. NATO's, backed by NATO, United States, etc., sanctions took place on Russia for invading Ukraine. And those sanctions have now escalated to where now, as you see in this article here, that before it was steel goods essentially, but today the sanctions have escalated to include concrete, wood, alcohol, and alcohol-based industrial chemicals were among the additional goods barred starting Monday morning. So it's an escalation. And as Reuters reported, Kaliningrad sanctions to take effect, Lithuania says. And what you see here is, what is the Kremlin planning on doing? This comes back to, you've poked the bear already with the United States and NATO in treating the whole Ukraine, and that should never have even occurred. And now Lithuania, which is part of NATO, so get this, Lithuania is part of NATO, has also poked the bear by supporting those sanctions. Remember, Lithuania is part of NATO, Ukraine is not. And as this says, the Kaliningrad governor, Anton Alikanov, said up to 50% of Kaliningrad's imports have now been affected. And on July 4th, the Kremlin said it's mulling over various schemes in case of blockade of transit. They said that back then, continues. So they didn't believe that Lithuania would proceed with today's sanctions, which essentially include 50% of the stuff to Kaliningrad. And remember, we'll talk about it shortly, Kaliningrad is extremely strategic to the Soviets. It's their port. You know, the other port they have, why they took back Crimea, that's in the Black Sea. They have that warm water port, and Baltic is the other, Kaliningrad is the other port. NATO and the Atlantic Council have said, we got to figure out a way strategically, and they've written documents on this over the last 5 to 10 years. It's been widely known if you go research, that we got to figure out a way to stop Russia from having access to these ports. So this has been part of NATO's strategy for a long time. So in this way, Lithuania is being essentially used as a proxy. Okay, so as the article continues, it says that Russia is looking at different things to do. It was just announced a couple of minutes before this talk that on July 15th, Russia has called an emergency session of its parliament. It's like the United States calling an emergency session of the House of Representatives, given what's going on. So some people believe Russia is actually going to declare war on Lithuania. And remember, we'll get into Article 5 of NATO shortly about this. So anyway, so that's the background. Lithuania, proxy of NATO, is blocking Russian goods to going to one of its provinces. Okay.